Morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. My name is Ashley. I oversee Creative Tides Ministry, which is a nonprofit that exists to empower creativity in churches, in worship and tech teams, as well as just individual creatives in the community. So we offer free resources and then this time of connection so that you can be, you can hone your skill, you can be equipped with partnerships in the area. If you have questions about things like lighting in your church, we want to help you make those connections. So today we're talking about lighting, and I just wanted to, before Jeff kicks us off, I just wanted to say the purpose of today is to give you tips and tricks and little nuggets for you to take back to your context. So we are not saying your stage should look like this, as awesome as this looks. We're saying, hey, here's gear, here's different resources that you could use, here's people that you could connect with if you already have lighting gear in place, or if you're wanting to build a lighting rig, these are the people you can ask your questions. And so just wanted to make sure you know, like, we are not setting the expectation that every church should look like this, but we want to best equip you for your space and for your services. So first off, Jeff is going to kick us off this morning.
All right, thank you. Okay, I'm Jeff Beachy. I'm a volunteer lighting guy at Rolling Hills Community Church, and been that way for 25 years, I think. So the background is mostly, my background in lighting is almost exclusively in that context, what we do at Rolling Hills for lighting. So I wanted to get a little bit of an idea where you guys are from a lighting perspective to see what the spread is. I know we have some spread in here based on what I've seen. So how many of you have been involved with lighting at your church already? Okay, reasonable spread. How many of those that have been involved in lighting have been involved in setting up lighting or programming lighting for Sunday services on a regular basis versus somebody that operates lighting on Sunday mornings? I saw Aaron over here. Okay, cool. Well, that's a perfect audience for what we're going to do here. So what I want to try to do, and Austin, if you can give me that wash only look we talked about. What I want to do is step through some of the fundamentals of lighting and talk about what's important when you think about how you do lighting, particularly in a church context. And some of this is applicable to other contexts. Some of it's applicable to, say, a drama context. How many of you do drama at your churches now? Okay, cool. That has been a part of what we've done at Rolling Hills in the past, not something we do right now, except once a year or once every other year, right, Mindy? So we'll think about these. These are general lighting principles that I think are important for people to understand as they're trying to set up or think about setting up a lighting rig or upgrading a lighting rig in their church or making best use of a lighting rig that you've already got. So we're going to talk through some of that stuff, get to the point where we talk a little bit about the kind of things that you can find in lighting instruments and walk through that a little bit. And then we'll transition to Austin, who will go through the way you can put together those elements particularly in a worship context. So that'll be kind of the thing that we do. And I want this to be as interactive as you guys want it to be. So if you have questions, fire them off. We'll try to answer them as we go, okay? So the first thing that I want to talk about is that there's one kind of inviolable thing that lighting needs to do, and that's to make people visible. In a room like this, if we didn't have a front wash of these lights out here, Austin, take those down for me. You know, that makes it a little bit hard to communicate what you're trying to communicate to people. So making people visible is always the most important thing that you'll want to do. And that can mean different things in different contexts. We'll talk about that a little bit. But if you don't accomplish that, you really need to work on that as your first thing, making sure that people are clearly visible. And I want to make a distinction here also between visible for people in the room and visible for people that are not in the room. So many churches now have camera systems and will stream their services or make their services available offline. And that's a very different problem. It's similar, but it's very different. And so because of the nature of churches that I'm familiar with, I'll be talking about what you do for lighting for people that are in the room. I'm not going to emphasize, maybe I'll mention a couple of times how that might be different for lighting for camera or for lighting for streaming. But generally what I try to do is build a balance that makes the room a very satisfying place to be and reinforcing what we're trying to do from a church service perspective inside the room, but make it sufficient for video, not ideal for video. And that's a big difference. If you're really targeting video, there are some things you really want to do very specifically for that purpose, but I'm not going to talk about that very much. So the first thing I want to talk about is the nature of this making people visible and how you would do that. What we have right here is a collection of 6 front lights that are producing a wash across the stage. It's very nice. I can move across the stage, not see a lot of change in the way my visibility is affected. And that's an important base layer to be able to have. You want to be able to have people that can take positions anywhere on the stage, particularly the front of the stage. That's usually one of the more important components, a stretch of 8 or 10 feet on the front of the stage, and be able to walk any place on that and not have places where you can't see. So from a base perspective, that's kind of what you would look for. You want to make that as uniform and effective as you can. These lights right now, you said these are running at about 40%, Austin? Yeah, so these lights can get much brighter than they are, and there's a very distinct intentional intensity thing that you want to work on. The primary thing that you can control on the lights that we're talking about here is how bright they are. That's what you can control dynamically in your service. For this style of light, where it's pointed on stage and how it hits the people on stage, that's something you decide ahead of service. You hang them where you want them to be, you point them where you think they're most effective, and you produce what you've got here is a nice wide wash. Now, once you get to a position, let's say you're in a part of the service where what you're really talking about, what you really care about is somebody standing in a particular position. Maybe you're teaching, maybe announcements, maybe other parts of the service. So let's go to just something you would use, Austin, for the teaching view. So now you can see that if I were to move too far off of here, I'm going to go out of that light. But I've effectively lit this one center position as a way of emphasizing that role, the role of this position in the service at that point in time. And that's one of the key things that you can do with front light is identify places where people ought to be looking. You can localize where on the stage are important to look. But it's also important, the nature of that light is also important. So Austin, let's drop to just the center fixture. And you can see a difference in the nature of the light when he dropped to just that center fixture. And that's light coming from one direction. And the way that hits somebody's face is very important. There are features on people's face that make it feel like like there's a human there talking to you. And you want to make sure you emphasize those, or at least make those cues available to people so they can feel like they're talking or listening to somebody talking from the stage. With one light like this, it can feel a little flat. It can feel like it's difficult to see shadows. You'll probably see a little bit of shadow from my nose, certainly shadow on my neck, but this part of my face is probably pretty flatly lit. Let's transition to the house right or house left fixture and take that center one out. And if I'm facing that fixture, I get a very similar effect. But if I'm turning and you're seeing parts of my head that don't get as much light as the front of my face gets, that's a very basic problem you can get if you have light coming from a single direction. So you want to think about that as you build up a lighting rig for places that are points on the stage that are particularly important to be able to see clearly what's happening. You want to see facial expressions. You want to see what's happening as a person's talking. Then rather than a single point light like we started with at the beginning, think about doing 2 lights. So add that house right one. And now you've got light coming from both directions. You'll see a little bit of shadow one side or the other of the nose, but that helps bringing the nose out. You'll see a little bit of shadow, a different set of shadows off of the eyebrows, And if I turn this way, I've still got light on this side of my face. If I turn this way, this side of the face is lit. So that's a very effective way of making sure that the person standing on stage is being effectively lit, seeing them as a three-dimensional human and getting cues off of that. And what Austin has here is a third light in the middle that helps bring that whole thing together. So that's single point lighting for important positions can be a little bit problematic. 2-point is very effective. 3-point gets you just about everything you want from the front. Now, can you add the blue wash we talked about behind me, Austin? Let's go ahead and take the front lights back out again and just see that as in context or in contrast to lighting coming from behind. So lighting coming from behind does some very important things. You can see light on my shoulders. You can see light on the edges of my arms, and that helps establish the outline of somebody that's standing on stage and can pull them away from the backdrop. And without that backlight and with just the front light, as we saw earlier, it's effective, but it's not as effective as it could be. So let's go ahead and bring the front lights back up. And now we have a combination of things happening. We got the front light effectively lighting my face, lighting my features, letting you see my expressions and so forth. But you also get a little bit of highlight off of my shoulders. You'll get some off the side of my arms, probably some off the top of my head. And that just establishes me in a three-dimensional space that's the stage. It separates me from what's behind. And we're doing that with blue light right now. But if, Austin, if you took one of those to white and really brought it down, focused on where I am, that's even more effective. So that you have some parameters you can work with there, but think about the positioning of lighting when we've done that. We've got 2 or 3 lights in front of us, 1 or maybe more lights behind us. I think a single backlight can be very effective for doing what we want to do. We've got a rig that's richer than that here, so you can do more things with it. But think about the placement of those lights. We didn't talk much about the aspects of how that light gets from the fixture to me. So let's think about that a little bit. Light that's too shallow, let's say we've got, pretend we had lights at kind of eye level around the room. That's very effective at lighting and removing shadows. If that's what your aim was to do, was to remove shadows, light from that angle can be very effective for doing that. But it can also make what you're seeing look kind of two-dimensional, not as much depth to it, because the shadows are great cues for understanding the depth of what you're seeing. So light that's that shallow is problematic. Light from straight overhead has the opposite set of problems. You get, there's almost no light on the eyes when you do that, and the nose. So the angle of the light is important. Rules of thumb there can be any place from 30 to 60 degree angles. These are probably at about 35 or 40 degrees, and that's a really nice angle for establishing that kind of visibility and the emotional connection that you want to do with somebody that's on stage. Yeah, question?
How do you consider the effect of glare? Because in previous instances I've had to worry about that. People complained that the light was shining in their face and it made them hard to see. I mean, it made it hard for them. And in fact, an audience can also face glare from backlights as
Yeah.
it's likely doing right now.
Yeah, that can be an important thing, and it's a balance that you're generally going to have to try to address. Obviously, from a backlighting perspective, this is closer to 60 degrees, and what I'm seeing is the main footprint of the light is kind of below where people's eyes would be in the front row, but lighting is not a precise thing. Light will go where it wants to go, and we can talk we can talk about sharply focused light versus diffuse light, but these are wash fixtures, and wash fixtures produce diffuse light. And so outside of the main area that fixture is hitting, you'll get some additional light beyond that. And you can get that kind of a problem with people where they, especially when they first are introduced to lighting in that way, that the glare can be a problem. And you have to balance that based on what you're trying to do in the room. I think intensity can help there. The intensity of that white light is arguably brighter than it needs to be to accomplish its task. So you could pull back the intensity of that light, make the glare less on people in the front row. I've had that discussion also with the worship team on stage, where I can't see the people in the room. There's a lot of glare in my eyes. And I think that's a trade-off that is kind of easier to make. The fundamental thing that you're trying to do there is making sure that people in the room can see. And over time, people on stage can adjust to that issue in terms of being able to see the room. That can also be helped by having brighter house lighting. So if you were to, right now, Austin's got a nice blue cast on the house because of the flexibility of their house fixtures. In a lot of cases, though, that wouldn't be blue. That would be white, or a closer to white color. And you could bring the intensity of the room up to be able to see. And in many cases, special cases for us in worship, there may be times when you really want that connection with the audience. And at those times, bringing the house up a little bit can be the way you accomplish that without compromising the visibility that you have on stage. Okay. I think it's also possible, and this depends on the nature of your conversation with others and maybe just experience for yourself as a lighting person, that you can definitely overlight people. So we said these are at 40%. Let's go ahead and take them to 100, Austin. There. Now, I've got a lot of glare in my eyes. It's difficult. I can kind of see what's out there in the room for me. But the big point is that that's way more light than you need to establish visibility in the room. And this somebody that's setting up video might really like that approach, because more light is better for cameras in a very general sense. If you have more light, the cameras are happier about it. But in order to establish the mood in the room, this would feel uncomfortable. If I was out there watching, I'd feel uncomfortable for the person standing on stage with light that's that bright. So finding a good level so that skin tones are natural, so that people can see what's going on stage, but not overlighting. That's the balance you want to have. And you're right that light from behind has the opposite impact on the audience. And in most cases, for most situations, in almost every church, not lighting people in seats is a priority. So you'll want to think about that as you look at places where you can, if you're particularly sensitive about that, the lighting position you use for this row of lights, you might move it up 2 or 3 feet. And that'll change the angle and affect the way the people in the front rows are impacted by the glare. Does that make sense? I don't know if that'll answer every question you have there. I think one of the things that we know as production people is nothing's ever going to satisfy everybody. So being aware of the trade-offs, being very intentional about those trade-offs, and honest with yourself about what you're doing versus what the needs of the congregation are and the needs of the room are. That's where you want to try to find those balances. So the next thing I want to talk about useful front light is to establish some level of composition on the stage. At the end of the day, you've got things on the stage that make up the set that you've got, but you've also got lighting, and lighting is a component of set design, always is, always will be. So be aware of that and use it as you accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. So I'm going to ask Kyler to come up on stage. See, I asked him that, and then he sat in the center of the, and let's go back to the just the podium. Not the, yeah, we're there. We're good that. And I'll ask Kyler, who plays just about any instrument that you could put in front of him. I've not heard him play an accordion or a penny whistle yet, but those are on the list. Okay, go ahead and sit back on the drum throne. So it can be, depending on the nature of your worship set, it can be effective to help isolate different parts of the stage. That allows the rest of your lighting to get a little bit more space. If there's not as much, if the front light is more focused, then the rest of what you do from a lighting perspective, and we'll get into that over the rest of the morning here, could be more effective at adding to the set. So right now, Kyler's in the dark back there. I'm lit in the front. But if we bring up a single light on him, much more visible, but doesn't affect much of anything else around him. That's a nice, tightly focused light on somebody that's not going to move around. You know, drummers are kind of limited in their movements anyway. I don't know what it is about drummers, but they that effective in doing that. Well, you can do the same thing over here on keyboards, and you could do that with any of your other backline people that you might have. In some cases, that might be important to do on the front line. So you have a straightforward way of bringing that wash kind of part way up, maybe down at 20 or 25%. Yeah, and leave me kind of up. So if you had a vocalist, for example, that was over here that was less brightly lit, but I have maybe a worship leader that's sitting in the center of the stage that comes to a point where they want to read a scripture or want to pray as part of what they're doing in the service. That can be an effective way to focus attention. I'm not sure why you'd ever want to focus attention on a drummer. Maybe. I can see maybe on a keyboard player you might want to focus attention, but think about that at differential intensities, brighter or dimmer on different parts of the stage, can be very effective in leading people to look where you would like them to look, depending on where you are in your service. So prayer times, scripture readings can be very effective for that. There may be times when you have a lead vocalist on a part in a song where what you really want to make what they're doing be the primary thing that people are thinking about. The music, the lighting, the rest of the room is all supportive of that, but it's really what they're doing that's the most effective thing. You can use intensities on your front lights to accomplish that. I'm done with you, Kyler. All right. So we talked about making sure people are visible. We talked about using lighting as part of your composition of isolating parts of the stage that are important to see at any given time. We talked about using backlighting and multi-point lighting to help establish some 3D characteristics in people's faces. All that I would call pretty fundamental to what you want to do in a lighting rig and in programming lighting for your services. So think of that as a base layer. If you're coming into a point where you want to do more with your lighting, make sure all of that is established as a baseline before you move on to anything else. Now, we've talked, in the process of doing that, we've used two primary kinds of fixtures. We've used the fixtures that we see in the front of the in front of me. Those would generally be what the industry would refer to as ellipsoidals or as spot fixtures. The idea is with those fixtures, you can establish a very hard edge for the light that they're projecting. You can also soften that edge out in most of those fixtures. The idea, though, is that you can much more precisely control where that lighting is going. And they're very effective for that. So we're going to talk about the difference between spot fixtures and wash fixtures here. Spot fixtures, the primary thing is you can focus them well. Because of the ability to focus them well, you give yourself a few additional capabilities that are harder to get with wash fixtures. Some spot fixtures will come with mechanical shutters that let you control where the edges are, kind of linearly where the edges are. You can pull boxes with them, or you can do any shape that matches what you're trying to do on stage. So spot fixtures are very effective for establishing control and are the go-to fixture really for doing front lighting. It gives you the kind of control you want to be able to isolate areas if you want, or to soften it up a little bit and do a wider wash like we saw earlier. The other kind of a fixture is a wash fixture. A wash fixture doesn't have an ability to establish crisp edges. And because of that, it will generally have an area of its beam that's brighter than the rest, and then an area where the beam kind of fades to nothing as it goes out to the side. And most wash fixtures, it doesn't actually ever go to nothing. You'll get spill from wash fixtures all over. So what we have, go ahead and bring up that wash row again, Austin. very effective at producing a uniform wash across the stage from behind. And that can establish color like we've got here. It can establish that backlighting for sculpting, and a very effective way of using the role that you've got for lighting behind you. If you were going to start with a lighting rig, you'd start with, from my perspective, you'd start with a set of spot fixtures in front to establish the front lighting, and then the next thing you would add is a layer of wash fixtures from behind, and give you an ability to combine those things with these. Everything that is in this room are LED fixtures, so we'll probably talk mostly about the effect of LED, but with LED color changing lights behind, lots of flexibility. Those lights are also lights that you can move and pan and tilt, so you can aim them where you want them to be and change that based on the needs that you've got in any given set design or in any given point in the service. So that's an effective way to go, but you don't have to. That row of lights could easily be a set of fixed position lights that establish a layer of color for you from behind the people that are on stage. So spotlights in the front, either fixed or moving headlights in wash from behind, and that's the kind of thing you would get. Then beyond that, there are applications for spot fixtures that are moving head fixtures. Sometimes that's effective in the front. If you've got front light that needs to change from week to week, that might be something you would consider as the next ad that you do, is the ability to give yourself flexibility. It can be difficult to get to lighting like this in a lot of rooms, and so the flexibility of being able to position those lights from a focus perspective where you want them to be, that might be the next most important thing for you to consider. But often that's a role that you would use on stage. And so the next layer of lights that Austin has are spot fixtures intentionally put in the set for very specific purposes. So you can see the edge on those. If you can see the stage, there's a very distinct spot from a spot fixture on whatever it hits. And that's the primary characteristic of a spot fixture. However, those edges can be softened, and you can do a lot more in general with spot fixtures like this. You can put we've made them larger and smaller. We can soften the edges, and then those, like the LED wash fixtures that we talked about, can also change color. And so you have another element that can give you colors as you want on stage. But spot fixtures have an additional layer of things that they can do that there's a couple of things about this that I want to talk about. There's the ability to project pattern and the ability to project movement in ways that are not the primary strengths of wash fixtures. One of the things that I talked about was lighting as a component of stage design or set design. And you can see how that plays out with light hitting the stage and being reflected. The key thing to remember here is that what you see on stage is because light is reflecting off of or being projected directly in, to the point of the glare problem that we talked about earlier, but generally reflected off of things on stage to be visible to you. And so you're seeing these spots on stage because that light reflects off of a fairly diffuse surface on the stage and lets you see what's happening there. You'll notice in this room that you get more than that, though. You have the ability to see the light as it leaves the fixture down to the floor, and that happens, that's an effect that can be referred to in many names, but I refer to it as atmospherics. You have the ability to actually bring the air into the set design and into the lighting design for what you're doing. And doing that with haze in this room, haze, there's foggers, there's hazers, there's smoke, there's a lot of terms that you might hear in the industry for that. This particular effect is a haze effect, and a haze is kind of a uniformly distributed small droplet in the air effect that allows light to be reflected as it moves from the fixture down to the stage. And you're seeing that because light's being scattered by these little particulates in the air. It's in particular in this case, just so people don't worry about it, it's a food safe oil that is very lightly spread through the room. In some cases that's water, in other cases it's more solid particles, but a lot of different technologies in that space. But what we're doing, what Austin has available to him in this room is a very light oil that's food safe and is not very dense. It doesn't feel like a smoky room. It feels like you have a little bit of additional capability in the room. So from that, you can start to use these fixtures to build much more intricate lighting situations. So let's go ahead and put a little pattern in that light, Austin. So now in this case, there's a feature of lights like this are called gobos. This is a very ancient technology from the standpoint of lighting, but it's basically a pattern, excuse me, it's a pattern element that interrupts the light between the light source in the back of the fixture and the lenses that focus that light as it comes out. So the interruption can be seen as texture in the beam. That texture can be very sharp, like Austin's brought it now, and you can see very distinct effects from the beam, or the focus of that can be changed so that goes much softer and you get a much more subtle texture in the lighting beams. The ways that can be done with spot fixtures are myriad. There's just many things that can be done with those things in lighting fixtures, and it's one of the things, if you get to that point in your lighting design where you want to add that to your capabilities, or you have that already available to you, the specifics of the fixtures that you're using will be very important. And so the selection of fixtures in that range can be something that you could spend days or weeks with. There's so many options out there, but you'll find some very common features there. The feature we talked about here is a gobo. It's either a metal disc with material removed for the light to pass through, or a glass disc that's got a printing on it or a pattern on it to let light pass through in various ways. So both of those techniques for gobos are available, and you end up with the ability to add pattern to what you're having. In many fixtures, that pattern can be rotated. So you can add a rotation to that pattern. Not only do you get a pattern in the beam, but you get some motion that goes along with that. That's a pretty substantial amount of motion, but you can do more subtle motions than that. And as you're working on, and this will come clearer as in Austin's part of this presentation, but as you're working on the way you want to present a song in a worship time, from my perspective, the whole reason for the set, for the band, for the lighting, is to support the basic need of that worship, to present a time where people can focus their intent on the worship activity and ideally work in concert with each other to reinforce the message that's trying to be presented and the experience that you're trying to present to people in the room. So there may be times when that movement is very much in tune with what's happening in the song that's being presented, but there are other times when that may be a distraction, and that's one of the things that you'll find as you move through the lighting, through maturity in the lighting process, is understanding the difference between support for what's happening and distracting from what's happening. It's very easy to do the second, and I've been very guilty of that at various times, and I'm happy when people point that out to me. Can't believe how happy I am when people point that out to me. Yes, it can be a shock at times, but the ability to do that at various levels with the fixtures you have is one of the reasons why these kind of fixtures are really flexible in what you're trying to do. So you can combine the things that we talked about. You can combine the motion of that gobo with the color that's being presented, the shapes that are being presented in that gobo, whether it's sharp or soft, as a way to work very different effects into what you're trying to do in the room. Now, in addition to the motion that you might get from rotating a gobo, let's go back to solid beams again there, Austin. And You can move, because these are moving head fixtures and you can point them where you want, you can also make them move as part of what you're doing. So add some kind of a movement effect there. We got them on the stage, but we don't, oh, there we go. Again, a very pronounced movement activity going on. And maybe you wouldn't want, some songs would want that though. I think as part of what we talk through, as part of what Austin talks through when we talk about the way to put songs together, the feeling of the song may evoke that for you. As I listen to songs, if my body wants to move with the song, then maybe I want the lights to move with the song. And that will be very, very dependent on the situation you're in with your congregation and with the equipment you have on stage. I want to kind of emphasize that. Any of these things, as they're introduced to a congregation, can be a little bit anxiety-inducing in the congregation, or complaint-inducing in certain senses. Even, the idea of adding a haze layer is one that you'll want to think about very carefully before doing that, if you don't have that in your room right now. The adding of movement can also be a thing that you want to be very careful about. So I would recommend that if you're going through that journey and picking up more complexity in the way you're doing lighting, you do it very gradually. You introduce one thing at a time, you let that become the norm for you, and adjust to the way the congregation feels as you move forward. The last thing that you want to do is having your set design or your lighting or the composition of your bands be the thing that makes people uncomfortable to come into your room. That's not what we're about. This is about making people more connected to the experience they're having in the room, not less connected. So you want to do all that very gradually. And these can be done very, very subtly. I mean, this is a pretty subtle move. And depending on the energy of the song, that can be a very, very important aspect of what you're doing with that song. So there's that kind of movement. There's the ability to add pattern. There's the ability to add color, and very flexible fixtures from that perspective. So as you're looking to add fixtures to your rig, you've got fixtures that are either fixed in function, they only point in one direction, not moving lights, for either spot fixtures or wash fixtures. Then you've got the ability to add spot or wash fixtures that are moving headlights that we just saw demonstrated. And that's most of what people would consider for a rig in a room for church. So there's a lot of stuff there. I'm happy to take questions about that before we transition over to what Austin has. Yeah.
This is more just kind of an ethos question, but you mentioned like slowly transitioning your congregation into more lighting. When you have people, I'm sure you've encountered this, who say, well, this church just has so much lighting, it's distracting me from worship, all those things. What is your answer to that, to kind of explain the technology and how it does have a purpose and how it is serving the moment? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think the most important thing from that perspective in my mind is the fact that a congregation is not a single person, that there are lots of different points of view. And what we try to do from a lighting perspective and from a set design perspective and from the composition of the worship team and the songs that they sing is address people in the room across that spectrum. Different things might be useful in different contexts. So when somebody asks me about, that it feels like you're doing a concert here, why do you go to that? Why do you go to that length? This is church, it's not a concert. We're doing the things that feel like a concert because they're effective at what they do. They're effective at making connection with people. And for people that whose church experience is much more constrained, they're from maybe a background that is primarily uses hymns, and there's an organ and a vocalist, a worship leader that leads people through that experience. It can be a very different experience to see many voices on stage with a collection of instruments and lighting that that's used to augment that experience. And so I think it's important to talk with people from the point of view that they have coming into that discussion, and say, but if you were, for example, if you were working with young people that have experience going to concerts, then there's something attractive about that as they see that kind of experience in a church and say, this isn't what I thought church was. I kind of like that. I can feel the song better as we do those things. And so it can be a tricky conversation, particularly with people that have very specific points of view on those things. And the important thing from my perspective is conveying that we're trying to address a wide variety of experience, a wide variety of histories, a wide variety of mental points of view as they come into the room, and we're doing that in a way that's consistent with what we're trying to do as a congregation. It can be a tough conversation, but it's also one that can be very, if the conversation on both sides is open, that can be a very, very heavy learning experience. I think I've gotten some really interesting conversations from people that are reluctant to embrace a more diverse kind of worship experience. Some congregations address that by having multiple services, a traditional service and a more contemporary service. I think I see that less now than I've seen it in the past. So there are various ways that can be addressed, and frankly, as a production team, being under the leadership of church leadership from that perspective is really important. And having a good relationship with church leadership as you're doing your production work, I think, key to doing what you're doing. First of all, they're going to likely approve whatever funding is necessary to produce the lighting rig you have. But second, and actually considerably more important, is their role to present a ministry to the local community that is consistent, and it can be having a dynamic worship section of the service with a very direct and focused teaching segment. There's things there that can feel dissonant. You want to be able to say that your service is consistent in its approach from start to finish, and that takes a lot of cooperation and collaboration with leadership and the production and the teaching team and other aspects of the ministries within your church, and then the ability to have confidence in what you're doing as you have a discussion with people, to be able to say, this is what we're trying to accomplish. What are you seeing in that? What's the and there are lots of things that can affect that. How loud the PA is during a worship time can be. Who in the congregation also works audio? Yeah. My guess is in any given congregation, the audio guy gets more complaints than any place else in production. The number of complaints I get, or compliments, either one, from a lighting perspective are, an order of magnitude less than the feedback that the audio guys get. So, but it all needs to work in concert. If the audio, the approach to audio is out of sync with the approach to lighting, if the lighting is very dynamic, but the audio is much more constrained, that can feel dissonant as well. So you got to be careful about it, side to side.
Going back to frontlight and backlight.
Yep.
Is there any advantages or disadvantages of having different color temperature backlight from the front light?
Yeah, that is. So we didn't talk directly about color temperature, and it's a concept that you're probably getting even if you've done nothing with lighting, just buying lights for your house can be can bring that into conversation. So color temperature really has to do with the quality of the white light that you're using. And color temperature that I'm seeing here, what do you think, Austin, is maybe 4,000, 4,500 Kelvin. Relatively high color temperature front light. It's, I think along with color temperature, you got to talk about color rendering, how effective it is about being a true, having true representation. Good quality color rendering means that that kind of light makes it look like maybe I'm standing in a the fundamental light source that everybody has reference to, which is the sun. So all colors are, the light from the sun is a very consistent spectrum, and just about every color has very good rendering when you're in sunlight. And so it's really important, especially with LED fixtures, that you consider color rendering. If you don't, you could get colors that look very different under those lights than they would look outside. But color temperature is a different situation. Color temperature you might see referenced as warm or cool or neutral. And a warm color temperature would be a little bit more yellow, and the cooler color temperatures would be toward the blue end of the spectrum. So it's still white light, but casting a little blue or casting a little yellow. The distinction that you can get, the question really about the difference between color temperature from the front and color temperature from the back, is that if any change in color from the front light to the back light will emphasize that sculpting that I was talking about. The ability to pick up the arms and the shoulders and the head. A different color temperature is a cue to the viewer's brain about what they're seeing. So oftentimes you will see, certainly when in the kind of things that we do for worship, they're not just a color temperature difference, but a color difference from behind to establish that in a very distinct way. But it's important. It can be important even if you're lighting somebody doing teaching during the service. So I think one of the things that you'll want to consider when looking at color temperature in general and looking at different color temperatures for different purposes is if there's video involved in the room at all, you want to talk to the video people. Color temperature can make a big difference in the way video is perceived. Most cameras of any generation are much happier to pick up blue light than they are to pick up red light. So you'll want to think about color temperature from the standpoint of your cameras if you have that involved in your congregation. But it can be effective to make them different. There are times when making them the same is something that's very satisfying as well. That can accomplish very specific things as you look at it. So the ability, using wash fixtures like we've got here for backlight will give you a wide range of things. Some wash fixtures will have a white emitter where you can adjust the color temperature directly. Right? In some fixtures, less sophisticated fixtures, you might bring up a mix of colors that looks pretty good for white, and then emphasize blue to go to higher color temperatures and remove some blue to go to lower color temperatures. But I think these fixtures have a more direct ability to affect color temperature. And so you can use that as a tool as you're building that look. In some cases, having a warm look from behind and a cooler look from the front makes a very effective but subtle impact on the way the scene is received by the people in the room.
If you have a wide array of skin tones between worship to speaker, how does that impact setting the light temperature?
Well, it can be more difficult. I think the most important thing there is consistency in your front light. If you don't really want your video people to be having to chase color temperature from the standpoint of how it affects faces. I think from a video perspective, that would be video is also, I need to be able to see what's happening, and seeing that happening, rendering that in the most natural way you can is important. So being very consistent about the color temperature you use from the front is, I think, the number one thing you can do for your video people. With LED fixtures, that's a little bit easier. With conventional fixtures that use halogen lamps or other incandescent technologies, the color of the light coming from that fixture will depend on how bright it is. And at dimmer intensities, the light's much more red, much cooler, or much warmer rather. And as it gets brighter, it can get cooler. So in that case, you'll want to try to keep your intensities pretty similar between a worship time and a teaching time or an announcements time. I think that's probably by far the biggest impact of that. The rest of it is, the rest of what you do with the set and the lighting in your set really is part of the set. Let's make the stage look like we want it to look to establish the purpose that we have during teaching. And for us, and I think I think that's probably true for Austin as well, we have a look that might, I refer to looks as any given combination of lighting and stage that you have at any given time. And we have a look that we use when people walk into the room. And that's what we want to use to greet people into the room. And often that same look is the basis for what we do for teaching. And we'll make that consistency be there. But then when we go into worship times, each of the individual songs really drives what we're trying to do. And so that can change a lot. And then as you move from that back to teaching, in our case, we would drop back into the walk-in look and be very consistent about what the front lighting looks like for video and for visibility. And again, I think as we saw earlier with intensity, it's very easy. It's very easy to go the wrong direction for people in the room in terms of how bright or dim things are. In my mind, job number one for most churches is make sure that what you've got in the room is effective for the people in the room, and then do what you can for video. But I think that one of the things you can do is keep that color temperature and the intensities as consistent as you can so that the video crew isn't chasing changes from different parts of the service. One of the things that we do in our worship sets, though, is anybody that's got a mic and that is delivering the lyrical component of the song will have more light, higher intensity light on them than somebody that maybe is playing keys or guitar or drums that doesn't have a vocal component. And that's effective for us in our room. What it does generally is mean that as you're looking either from the seats or from camera, you'll see a contrast between people in the front line that are singing and the people in the back line. There'll be a distinction between those things that can be effective at establishing that they're not in the same space, that some of them are further back than others, but it also helps to focus on the leadership of the song that's happening there. So we do that pretty consistently. The front line is brighter than the back line. That can cause the video team to have to chase things a little bit. And you know, I do hear about it from time to time, but they're very effective at chasing those things. So.
If a church had a limited budget to either implement lighting or upgrade their lighting, say they could buy 3 fixtures, what would you recommend prioritizing between front, back lighting, movers? What's a good baseline?
Well, again, I would establish the visibility component first. And so I would look first at making sure that front light is everything that you can make it be. And from an infrastructure perspective, that can be some of the hardest part of it. If you're adding a collection of front lights to a room that hasn't had that before, it's not just the cost of the fixtures, but how do you get power to them? How do you get to them to focus them? How do you support them mechanically correctly? So I want to establish that before I do anything else. And in many rooms, that's okay. That part of it can be established. And what you're trying to do there is move away from a power-hungry conventional fixture to something that consumes less power and is more sustainable in general sense by converting maybe to LED fixtures. But I would start with that layer. If you feel like that layer is solid, then I would look next at being able to add color to your set, being able to take a set and change its color to match what's happening at that moment in the service, and maybe change the emotional impact that might have. And then the last thing I would add would be the ability to project beams, movement in the room, more dynamic color changes. That would be the third layer that I would look at. But I'd start with front light, make that solid, be able to add some color, and that can be very inexpensive these days. Adding color, those fixtures don't have to cost very much. And then, part of that is you don't have to look at moving lights to establish that capability. And then look at the rest of it as kind of the final mile that can be a lot of different things, a lot of different costs, and a lot of different trade-offs, but all of that built on the foundation of being able to see and establish a little bit of mood with some color.